The morning rain fell softly over Seattle, painting the streets in silver and gray. Inside a small cafe on Maple Street, the world felt slower, quieter, a safe corner away from the noise of everything outside. The smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air, and a soft tune played from the old speaker near the counter. Claire sat by the window, a book open in front of her that she wasn't really reading. Her cup of coffee had gone cold long ago, but she didn't mind. She came here every morning, not for the taste of coffee, but for the calm it gave her, a calm she couldn't find anywhere else. Life had become a steady rhythm for her. She worked at a local design firm, went home to an empty apartment, cooked for one, and spent most weekends watching old movies. It wasn't that she hated being alone. She had simply gotten used to it. After her last relationship ended 2 years ago, Claire stopped expecting much from life. She stopped waiting for someone to notice her, to understand her. The world moved on, and so did she. Or at least she thought she did. The cafe was her small escape, her only place that felt like hers. The same barista greeted her every morning with a kind smile. The same old couple sat near the counter reading newspapers. Everything stayed the same, and maybe that's what made it feel safe. But deep down, beneath that quiet routine, something in her was tired. Tired of waiting for life to surprise her again. That morning felt no different at first. The clouds hung low, and the glass window was misted with rain. She traced small circles on her cup as she listened to the rain tapping outside. Then, the soft chime above the door rang a sound she barely noticed anymore. But this time, for some reason, she looked up. He walked in quietly, shaking the rain from his coat. He wasn't anyone special, no movie star face or confident stride. But there was something about the way he carried himself, like someone who had seen enough of the world to stop pretending. His hair was slightly messy from the rain, his eyes calm but thoughtful. He stood near the counter, ordering his drink, his voice low and kind when he spoke to the barista. Claire didn't know why, but she couldn't look away. When he turned to find a seat, his gaze brushed hers for a second. Just a second, and he smiled politely. Not a flirtatious smile, not forced, just real. The kind of smile that felt like a quiet hello between two strangers who understood loneliness in the same language. Claire looked down at her cup, pretending to be busy. But her heart had already started beating a little faster. He chose the table near hers, a few seats away. Close enough for her to hear the soft rustle of his notebook as he opened it, far enough for them to remain strangers. He pulled out a pen and began to write. She tried to go back to her book, but found herself glancing at him again. He looked focused. The kind of person who didn't mind being alone. The kind of person she once thought she was. Minutes passed in silence. The rain outside grew heavier, and the cafe grew quieter. The old couple had left, the barista was cleaning cups behind the counter, and only a few customers remained. Claire's eyes drifted toward him again. He was still writing, occasionally pausing to sip his coffee. She wondered what kind of things he was writing. Poetry, maybe. Or a letter to someone far away. The idea made her smile without realizing it. Then he looked up again, and their eyes met for the second time. This time, he smiled a little wider. Claire froze, unsure whether to return it or look away. But something about his expression, warm, easy, not demanding anything, made it simple to smile back. She didn't even notice she was doing it until it was too late. And in that tiny, wordless exchange, something changed. The cafe felt different, the air lighter somehow. Claire's chest felt warm in a way she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't love, not even attraction yet, it was awareness. Awareness that another person existed in her quiet world. Someone who felt like a small spark in a place that had grown dim. She told herself not to think too much about it. He was just a stranger passing through. Maybe he'd never come back. Maybe he was only there because of the rain. But the thought of him walking out and never returning left, it's a strange emptiness inside her. One she couldn't explain when he finally got up to leave. She pretended to read again, though her eyes followed him quietly. He paused near the door, looked back once more, and offered her that same gentle smile. And then, just like that, he was gone. The sound of the door chime echoed softly behind him. Claire stared at the empty space where he had been sitting. The chair looked lonely now. She glanced down at her cold coffee inside, her heart still carrying the warmth of that unexpected moment. For the first time in a long while, she didn't want to go back to her apartment. She wanted to stay just a little longer in that small cafe where something inside her had begun to wake up again. As the rain eased outside, she packed her things slowly. The book she hadn't read, the cup she hadn't refilled, everything felt the same, yet nothing did. She looked at the door, half expecting him to walk in again, but he didn't. Still, the thought made her smile. Maybe tomorrow, she told herself. Maybe tomorrow he'll come back. She left a little tip on the table, said goodbye to the barista, and stepped out into the damp air. The city smelled fresh after the rain. For once. The sound of her footsteps didn't feel so lonely. She didn't know who he was or why his presence mattered so much already, but somehow, in the middle of her quiet life, something had shifted. And though she couldn't explain it, Claire felt that this small encounter, this brief crossing of paths, was not the end of something, but the beginning. She just didn't know it yet, because sometimes life doesn't announce its turning points. It simply walks in quietly, orders a coffee, and smiles. The next morning, Claire walked into the cafe earlier than usual. The sky was pale, and the smell of rain still lingered in the air. She told herself she just wanted some quiet before work, but deep down, she knew she was hoping to see him again, the man with the notebook. She chose the same corner seat, pretending not to care, though her eyes flicked toward the door every time it opened. Minutes passed. She stirred her coffee more than she drank it. Just when she started to feel silly for waiting, the door chimed softly. He walked in again, same coat, same calm expression, a little bit of rain still on his shoulders. Her heart gave a small, surprised flutter. He noticed her right away, and that gentle, familiar smile returned. This time, he didn't sit far away. He paused for a moment, looking at the empty chair near her, then asked, "Mind if I sit here? Every other table's taken." His voice was low, warm, easy to listen to. Claire nodded quickly. Of course, it wasn't true. There were plenty of empty tables, but she didn't care. He set down his coffee and the same old notebook. "I'm Ethan," he said, extending his hand. Claire hesitated only a second before shaking it. "Claire." The conversation started small, the weather, the coffee, the rain that never seemed to stop in Seattle. Then it drifted naturally into deeper things, where they grew up, what they did, what they liked about quiet mornings. Ethan told her he was a writer, working on a new book, but struggling to find inspiration. "I thought maybe a change of city would help," he said. Chicago was too loud, too heavy. Claire smiled softly. "Seattle's quieter, but it can feel lonely sometimes." He looked at her for a moment before replying. "Sometimes lonely is exactly what we need until it isn't." Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. They both fell silent for a moment, sipping coffee, watching the rain outside. It wasn't awkward silence. It felt like both of them understood what the other meant without needing to explain. From that day on, it became a pattern. Every morning, they met at the same cafe, sitting by the same window. Sometimes they talked about simple things, favorite books, movies, or music. Other times, they shared pieces of their pasts. It's the kind of things people don't usually tell strangers. Ethan spoke about his last relationship, how it had faded quietly. "We didn't fight," he said once. "We just stopped understanding each other. One day I woke up and realized the silence between us wasn't peaceful anymore. It was just empty." Claire listened quietly, feeling every word. Her own story wasn't much different. She told him about her breakup, how her boyfriend had moved to another city for work. And distance had slowly turned love into memory. "After that, I just stopped expecting anything," she admitted. "It's easier not to hope." Ethan nodded. "I used to think that too," he said. "But maybe that's why we end up feeling stuck, because we stop expecting life to surprise us." Claire laughed softly. "You sound like a writer even when you're not writing." He smiled. "I guess I can't help it." Days turned into weeks. Their coffee meetings became something both of them looked forward to. They never planned them, they just showed up as if by instinct. The barista started remembering their orders before they spoke. It wasn't a routine built from habit. It was one built from comfort. Sometimes they stayed for an hour. Sometimes two. On quiet mornings, they simply sat without speaking, each doing their own thing, just sharing space. It felt natural, like they had known each other much longer than a few weeks. One morning, Ethan brought his notebook closer to her side of the table. "Can I show you something?" he asked. Inside were pages of short notes, small observations, pieces of sentences that read like poetry. He pointed to one line that said, "Sometimes people meet too late. But maybe late is better than never." Claire read it twice, her heart softening. "That's beautiful," she said quietly. "Who's it about?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Not sure yet." She felt her cheeks grow warm, unsure what to say. Instead, she took a sip of coffee and tried to hide her smile. Over time, Ethan began to feel less like a stranger and more like a missing piece of her life she didn't know she needed. They shared inside jokes, smiled at each other's stories, and exchanged glances that lingered longer each day. The connection wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, deep, and quietly growing. But behind the laughter and the calm, both of them carried a quiet fear. They didn't talk about it, but they felt it. The fear of ruining something pure by naming it. So they kept their feelings tucked behind smiles and coffee cups, pretending the friendship was enough. One cold morning, as sunlight broke through the clouds, Ethan arrived late. He looked distracted, almost worried. "Sorry," he said, sitting down. "Got caught up in a call." Claire smiled, though she noticed something different in his tone. "Everything okay?" He nodded, then hesitated. "I got an offer. A publishing house in New York wants to work with me." The words hung in the air like heavy rain. Claire froze, unsure how to react. "That's amazing," she said, trying to sound happy. "Yeah," he said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's a big opportunity. I just don't know if I'm ready to leave." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him not to go, but the words felt selfish. So instead, she smiled politely. "You should. It's what you've been working for." He nodded, staring down at his cup. Maybe. The silence between them was different that day. Not peaceful, but uncertain. Every word after that felt careful, like they were both afraid to say too much. When Ethan finally left that morning, he looked back at her once before walking out. She smiled faintly, waving goodbye, not knowing if it was their last. That evening, Claire sat by her window at home, watching the rain fall again. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the usual comfort in it. Instead, it reminded her of their mornings, the laughter, the quiet moments, the warmth that had quietly filled her empty days. She realized how much she had come to rely on those small moments with him. The conversations that made her feel seen, the smiles that made her mornings lighter. And now she wasn't sure what she'd do without them. As night settled in, Claire closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Maybe it's better not to get used to something that can disappear." But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Some people walk into our lives so gently that we don't realize. They've changed everything until they're gone. And as she lay there listening to the rain, she couldn't help but wonder, would he come back tomorrow? Or had the quietest part of her life just ended without warning? The following days felt heavier than usual. Claire still went to the cafe every morning, hoping things would feel normal. But they didn't. Ethan came too, but something between them had quietly changed. They still talked, still laughed, but there was a new silence, one filled with things neither of them dared to say. Every time Claire saw him, she wanted to ask if he had made his decision about New York, but fear kept her quiet. She didn't want to hear an answer that would break the fragile peace they still had. One morning, Ethan came in later than usual. He looked tired, distracted. His usual smile was there, but it felt forced. "Sorry, I overslept," he said, sitting down with his coffee. Claire smiled gently, but her heart felt uneasy. "Busy thinking about the offer?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's a big step. I've been waiting years for something like this." He paused, looking down at his hands. But for some reason, I'm not as happy as I thought I'd be." Claire wanted to tell him why that maybe happiness wasn't about success or cities, but about the people who made mornings worth waking up for. But she stayed silent. Instead, she said softly, "Sometimes our dreams don't look the same when we finally reach them." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You're right." The rest of that morning passed slowly. They talked about books, about the weather, about anything but the one thing that mattered. When Ethan left, he touched her hand gently, just for a second, and said, "I'll see you tomorrow." But the look in his eyes said something else, something uncertain. The next morning, he didn't come. Claire sat at their table, waiting longer than she should have. The door chimed again and again, but it was never him. She kept checking her phone, though he'd never asked for her number. When she finally left, the chair across from her felt painfully empty. Days turned into a week. Then 2. She told herself he must have left for New York, that it was what he was meant to do. But the thought didn't make it easier. Every morning she still came to the cafe, out of habit, or maybe out of hope. The barista asked once if her friend was coming back. Claire just smiled and said she wasn't sure. She tried to distract herself with work. Her designs piled up, her deadlines came faster, but her heart wasn't in any of it. At night, she would stare at the city lights from her apartment window, remembering his laugh, the way he looked at her when she talked, the quiet moments when they didn't need words. It all felt like a dream that ended too soon. One evening, she found herself walking down the street where they once talked about books. It was cold, the wind sharp, but she barely noticed. She passed by a bookstore and stopped when she saw a display near the window, a collection of new authors. Her eyes landed on a familiar name, Ethan Miller. Her breath caught. There it was, his book. The title read, "The Quiet Between Us." She went inside, hands trembling as she picked it up. The back cover said he was now based in New York. Her chest ached. She opened to the first page, and there it was, a line she remembered from his notebook. "Sometimes people meet too late, but maybe late is better than never." Tears filled her eyes. He had gone. He had made it. And she was proud of him, but also deeply sad. She bought the book, hugged it to her chest, and walked home in silence. That night she read it from start to finish. The story wasn't just fiction, it was them. To lonely people finding comfort in morning coffee and unspoken feelings. It was her story too, only now written in past tense. The next morning, she didn't go to the cafe. She stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. She thought about all the small moments they had shared, all the things she wanted to say but never did. She wondered if he missed her too, or if she had just been another chapter in his life. Weeks went by. She started working on new projects again, trying to rebuild her routine. But nothing filled the quiet like he once did. Still, she tried to be grateful for having met him at all, for feeling something again after years of numbness. One evening, as she walked home from work, she stopped by the cafe out of habit. The smell of coffee, the sound of the door chime, everything was the same. She sat at their old table, ordered her usual drink, and took out a pen. On a napkin, she wrote, "Thank you for walking in when you did." She folded it neatly and left it under the sugar jar. It was her small goodbye. As she stepped outside, the air felt colder than usual. She pulled her coat tighter and looked up at the sky. It was one of those nights when the city lights blurred into the clouds, beautiful but distant. She realized she had spent so much time waiting for someone else to make her feel alive, that she had forgotten how to do it for herself. But deep down, she still hoped. Not for him to come back, but for the feeling, that warmth, that quiet connection to find her again someday. Maybe with someone new, maybe somewhere else. The next morning she woke up early and brewed her own coffee at home. She sat by the window, watching the sunlight creep through the blinds. It didn't feel the same, but it didn't feel empty either. Something inside her had changed. She had learned that sometimes love doesn't stay. It teaches. It reminds you that your heart still knows how to feel, even after being quiet for too long. Still, there were moments like when she passed the cafe or saw someone with a notebook, when a small ache returned. But she accepted it as part of the story. Some connections aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to remind us that we're not alone in our loneliness. And though Ethan was now hundreds of miles away, she knew she'd never forget the way he made her mornings brighter. She closed her eyes, whispered his name once, and smiled. Not in sadness, but in gratitude. Because for a short, precious time, she hadn't been lonely. The distance between them had grown, but the memory of what they shared still lived quietly inside her, like a warm echo of something beautiful that once walked into her life and changed everything without trying. Snow fell gently over Seattle that morning, covering the streets in a soft white layer. The city looked peaceful, but inside Claire's heart there was still a quiet ache that never fully faded. It had been almost a month since she last saw Ethan. She had stopped expecting to see him again, though a part of her still checked the cafe door every time the bell chimed. Life had slowly found its rhythm again, but it wasn't the same. Mornings felt quieter, colder. The cafe that once felt alive now carried memories she couldn't shake. That day she arrived later than usual. The place was half empty, the windows fogged from the warmth inside. She ordered her usual coffee and sat in her old spot by the window. She told herself she was only there for the comfort of routine, not because of him. But as she wrapped her hands around the cup, she couldn't stop thinking about that last morning, the look in his eyes when he said goodbye without saying the words. She had read his book twice now. The story of two lonely souls finding each other and then partying had become something she knew by heart. It made her proud that he had succeeded, but it also left a quiet emptiness in her chest. It was strange, she thought, how you could feel close to someone who was miles away, outside. The snow kept falling, and the cafe filled with the smell of freshly baked pastries. She looked out the window, lost in thought, when she heard the familiar sound of the door chime. She didn't look up, she didn't want to disappoint herself again. But then, from the corner of her eye, she saw a man brushing snow off his coat. Something in her heart froze. She looked up, and her breath caught. It was him, Ethan, standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee, his hair dusted with snow. His eyes searching the room until they found her. He smiled, that same gentle smile she thought she'd never see again. For a moment she couldn't move. She just stared, unsure if she was dreaming. He walked toward her slowly, almost carefully, as if afraid she might disappear if he moved too fast. When he reached her table, he placed 1 cup in front of her. "You still take it with 1 sugar, right?" he said softly. Claire blinked, her throat tightening. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" He sat down across from her, his eyes warm and nervous all at once. "I didn't go," he said. "I tried to. I really did. I packed everything, bought the ticket, but when I got to the airport, I just couldn't get on the plane." She stared at him in disbelief. "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because every time I thought about New York, I saw empty streets and noise. But when I thought about this place, I saw you sitting here, waiting for your coffee, smiling at me over the edge of a cup. I realized I didn't want to start something new by leaving something that already felt right." Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hold back. "You left without saying goodbye," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly, "and I regretted it the moment I did. I thought it would be easier that way, that you'd forget me faster. But I couldn't forget you. I missed our mornings, our talks. I missed the peace I felt here. I missed you." Claire looked at him, searching for the right words. Everything she wanted to say, all the loneliness, the hope, the hurt, came rushing at once. But she could only manage a trembling smile. "You really came back?" "I did," he said, his voice steady. "Because sometimes we think chasing our dreams means going somewhere far. But maybe it just means finding the right person to share them with." She laughed softly through her tears. "You sound like your book," he chuckled, the tension in his face easing. "Guess I've finally figured out how to write the ending." They sat there in silence for a moment, both smiling, both trying to understand that this was real. The snow kept falling outside, soft and endless, and the cafe felt warm again, just like it used to. Claire reached for her coffee, her hand brushing against his. Neither of them moved it away. I thought you'd forgotten about me, she said quietly. I tried, he admitted, but it didn't work. She smiled, shaking her head. You could have called, he grinned. I didn't have your number. That made her laugh, the first real laugh she'd had in weeks. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her the way he used to. That same fondness in his eyes. You look happier, he said softly. Claire nodded. Maybe because you walked in again? He looked at her with warmth that spoke more than words. Then I guess I came back at the right time. They talked for hours, catching up on everything they had missed, her new projects. His book launch, the strange quiet that had followed his success. He told her he planned to stay in Seattle for good, to write his next story here. I think I write better when I'm not running away, he said. When he stood to leave, he looked hesitant. Can I see you again? Outside of this cafe? I mean, Claire smiled, her heart full. I'd like that. He nodded, relief flashing across his face. Tomorrow then? Tomorrow, she said softly. After he left, Claire sat alone for a while, her heart steady but warm. The cafe was closing soon, but she didn't rush to leave. She watched the snow outside, her reflection in the glass, and thought about how strange life could be. How sometimes the person you think you've lost forever walks right back into your world when you least expect it. The next morning, she arrived early again. The sky was clear, the snow glittering under the sunlight. When Ethan walked in, he looked like he belonged there, as if he had never left. He brought 2 coffees again, setting one in front of her. You look like you needed this, he said, smiling. Always, she replied, returning the smile. And in that simple moment, the quiet clink of cups, the warmth between them, the way sunlight poured through the window, Claire understood something she hadn't before. Love didn't always come in grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it arrived quietly, sat across from you, and waited patiently until you were ready to see it. They didn't need big words or promises. They just needed that morning 2 people who had found their way back to each other, in the same small cafe where it had all begun. As they talked and laughed, Claire realized her loneliness had finally lifted. It hadn't disappeared overnight. It had slowly faded, replaced by something gentler. Something real, and as snow melted outside and the world carried on, she knew that whatever came next, whether love, friendship, or something still unnamed, it would be enough. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories aren't about how love begins, but how it finds its way back.